Hello to all of our good friends out there in the Boss Hole Transformation Nation. This is your host, actually today your co-host, John Brewer from Real Good Ventures. Great to have you here on the Boss Hole Chronicles. Joining me today is Sara Best, my amazing partner. We have spent several months out on the road working with our clients, lots of things going on, and we haven't had the same time in the studio, but we do. We have this week, and we will next week. We've got a few weeks of really amazing episodes coming your way. This week, we're going to be talking about the topic of engagement, which is prevalent, and the issue of engagement, or disengagement, if you will, is something that most organizations are facing, and a few organizations are doing some great things to elevate and have a positive impact on engagement. We will be speaking specifically about that today. As a matter of fact, we will be referencing what all managers can be doing, specifically what CEOs can be doing, and we'll also be drawing from some great insights from an article recently published by Vistage Worldwide. We're going to put a link to that article in the show notes, as well as other links to help you understand and focus you on improving engagement in your organization. So it's so good to be back with Sara. Let's jump in. The Boss Hole Chronicles are brought to you by Real Good Ventures, the talent optimization firm helping organizations diagnose their most critical people and execution issues with world-class analytics. Make sure to check out all the resources in the show notes and be sure to follow us and share your feedback. Enjoy today's episode. Well, hey, Sara. It's good to be back together. How you doing?
Hey, John, I'm great. It's been a long time since
I know.
we've been at the mics together. It's good to see you, and it's good to be with you as well. How are you doing?
I'm doing wonderfully. I'm doing real good. And at the same time, over these last few months, with both of us being out there, there's a lot going on and a lot to talk about. And we're going to have one of those conversations. Actually, for the next few weeks, we want to share with you just what we're experiencing out there in the marketplace and give our managers, our supervisors, our leaders some very practical advice. So what are we going to talk about today?
Well, engagement, that E word, continues to be significant and important in leadership and in the workplace. And it's safe to say that most of the clients we deal with are continuing to work hard to boost engagement. And John, give our listeners a reminder of what our definition of employee engagement is.
Sure. Happy to. We define engagement as an employee's emotional commitment to the organization and its goals. So there's something strongly felt from the employee standpoint, and we can measure that. We do that as part of our work with our clients, but that's our definition of engagement.
The other thing that I know people are talking about, and I've heard this probably 5 times in the last week and a half, I can't find people to work.
Mm-hmm.
We have openings, but we're not seeing the candidates. There's a reason for that. We can cover that in more detail in a future episode. But there's a term called workforce velocity. It's worth noting. Workforce velocity has to do with the pace of change in jobs. And even though the economy isn't necessarily a recession, we know the economy has slowed, and therefore hiring has had some cooling. But for a period of time in 2022, positions skyrocketed, hiring skyrocketed. Even then, we saw a shortage in people to fill those positions. Mm-hmm. But at this point, the workforce velocity indicator would say, hey, you have to work on retention if you're going to prepare yourself for growth as an organization. And most of our clients are having discussions about growth. Even though the economy has slowed, they're looking at ways to expand what they do. So we know we're going to need people to do that, even with the introduction or more serious introduction of AI and things like that. So engagement creates resilience for an organization. Engagement isn't that hard to develop if a CEO or a leader or a supervisor or manager works on the right levers, pushes on the right levers. Would you agree, John?
Totally agree. It is manageable. It is possible to build engagement, and we can measure it. That's the thing. There are thousands of engagement assessments out there. Not all of them, I would say, have been successfully deployed. I know the one that we use is incredibly powerful. If you are going to the lengths to measure engagement and you fail to follow through on what you've learned, you will increase disengagement. And so that's one of the things that's very different about the way we approach engagement with our clients is we give them the tools, or we help them develop the tools to take action on the results from engagement. But I think that's part of the problem. Let's go measure engagement, and then we don't do anything with it, which we call the big nothing, and engagement gets worse.
Well, it's fair to say, John, that it's not that people don't intend to do something with it or that they intentionally disregard the data,
right?
But many of our organizations aren't structured. There's not a system in place. There's not a format or a medium in place to really address these issues. That's a whole nother subject too, isn't it?
It is, but we have one. Yes.
Yeah, you do. We do. So I would say if we're talking about keeping the workforce you have, especially those that are performing well, there are some things, and I'm actually drawing today from a source provided by Vistage Worldwide. So,
Okay.
John, you and I are both Vistage speakers. I'm actually part of a trusted advisor Vistage group. We're fans of the Vistage organization, and they do a lot of research, like many of the other bodies. I mean, if we're talking about engagement, you and I have unpacked the latest engagement data from Gallup, which came out in January of 23, where sadly we knew that we hit a 9-year low in engagement. So this isn't a subject that is all of a sudden really relevant and new. It's been important, and we have not effectively moved the needle on it. But here's the deal. We have to, our organizations have to, if we're going to be ready for growth and whatever comes next. So how about if we just unpack a few quick ideas about what a leader or CEO can do right now to better increase the odds for good engagement?
Great idea. Let's do it. What's number one?
How about align behind a purpose?
Okay.
Align behind a purpose. One of the things we do, John, when we work with leadership teams is help them land on what is the most important thing they have to accomplish in the next 6 to 9 months to consider themselves successful. And that driving force, if you will, that rallying cry becomes something that the whole organization likely can line up behind. You know, it's different than your 5-year plan or your 10-year plan, your strategy. It's really about what do we have to accomplish right now? What are we getting ready for? Making sure all employees understand the purpose. We've cascaded that message and we've communicated it clearly. We've over communicated that message. But let's be honest, it doesn't matter what generation you come from. People are going to feel better if what they're doing contributes to the purpose and to something that matters. So we got to pay attention to that. And we also have to note, John, there's a rising class of Gen Z employees. Well, let me just say this. Remember when we used to talk about millennials? Like,
yeah,
millennials are here. They're turning 40.
I know. It's
So
crazy.
we have a whole nother generation squarely in the workforce right now, and they are very purpose driven. I don't claim to be an expert on the generations. In fact, we would want to direct our listeners to Jason Dorsey and his organization. They do so much research around the generations. I just listened to a podcast of his recently. It's fascinating, and it's not difficult. If we pay attention to what they need and what they're looking for, we would not have to change dramatically in our workplace what we're doing and how we're doing it to keep these bright minds and bright talent engaged. So we got to pay attention to who we have, and we have to tell them what our purpose is and create some connection to what they're doing.
Well, I think it needs to go a little bit. I don't disagree with that at all, Sarah. However, I think most leaders or CEOs would be listening to this and say, well, we have a mission statement. We tell people what our purpose is. However, how confident are you that it actually has taken root and that everybody is aligned around the purpose or the mission or whatever your
or the goals?
What they are. And so our answer to that is stop guessing, stop assuming that it's right. I just had a conversation with a CEO the other day because what we've proposed is that let's do a mid-year check. Let's do a mid-year check on strategic alignment and execution alignment, because if you're not aligned, you will pay what we call an unnecessary execution tax. And that is something that you don't even see if you can't be absolutely confident that people are aligned. So our answer to that is measure it. All right. In our world at Real Good Ventures, our line of sight diagnostic, we measure, we look at the CEOs, view into strategic execution, and then we compare that to the senior leadership team and compare all of that to the management level, and then all of that to the organization. In other words, stop assuming and just anecdotally saying, yeah, we talk about it all the time. If you can't look at it objectively, you can't be sure you're not paying that execution tax. And it's really, really costly.
Yeah, that's so true, John. And it's not difficult to gather that insight and data
No.
and respond to it.
Yep.
And so that kind of points directly to the next two ideas, which you actually already touched on, John. Measure engagement. So if you're an organization that hasn't really done a good job of capturing engagement data and keeping up with that and the trends and flows of that data, you should start. You really should. It's standard practice now, and we have to be informed by that information. Then the next part is act on the results. John, I know you touched on this, but what encouragement could you give our leaders and managers and supervisors about, steps they can take to create some action around engagement challenges?
Well, okay, so the easy answer to that, Sarah, obviously is our employee experience survey and our workshop, Take Action on Engagement workshop that we do for our clients. However, I think, if to keep it completely agnostic from any particular tool, you have to realize it's the manager that has to take action. This isn't somebody else's responsibility. If your employees have honored you with feedback, you need to honor them with a response, and not just just regurgitate the data, but say, okay, this is what we have realized we need to do to take action and start to move the needle on engagement in very specific spots. And that's where I think the difficulty becomes how to translate engagement data into plausible and practical action steps without a framework. And most engagement assessments and employee feedback tools don't have that built in. We do, but if you don't have it built in, figure that out. In other words, invest the time to help managers understand their specific role in engagement. Because if that doesn't happen, the next time you go around and measure engagement, like we said before, what hope do you have that it's actually going to be improved?
Right. John, do you have you've done a number of taking action workshops, taking action on engagement workshops. Do you have a real practical example you could share of, here's some of the feedback a manager received, and here's an action item they generated in response directly to that feedback?
Yep. Happy to. So when we sit down and take managers through a Take Action on Engagement workshop, what they get is what we call they get a personal action plan that specifically calls out an element within the feedback. So for example, if, one of the caution areas or blind spots for a manager is my manager meets with me frequently to talk about my development. And that's a low favorability response, but high impact on engagement. So in other words, the feedback to the manager on that was not favorable from their direct reports. So the Take Action workshop says we're going to focus on that one specifically for the next few months. And so we identify that as a specific objective. I need to meet with my team members regularly and understand and help them with their growth. So what are your strategies around that? Create an individual development plan for each person. Use our behavioral data to understand alignment or misalignment to the job. And then it goes down to tactics, very specific tactics that are time bound that they have to do. So we take something that is valued feedback that has a high impact on engagement, and we help the managers create a specific action plan for that. And then once they are working on that, then they go to another, caution area. And so bit by bit, we're giving them a tool to execute on engagement with specific feedback from their team members. Now, that's getting really deep into the weeds, but without that, they're just guessing and they're wandering aimlessly trying to improve engagement.
Well, there's a couple things in there, John, that I think are important to remember. You digest one key area at a time. So a manager might feel the pressure, or the organization may feel the pressure to address all the challenges.
Yes.
But that's impossible. And I think research shows us if we have one objective, we're likely to achieve that one objective. If we have 1 to 3, we're likely to achieve 1.
Mm-hmm.
If we have 3 to 5, we may achieve 1 to 3. And if we have over 7, 0.
Right.
So keeping in mind that focusing on one area of challenge is essential. The other thing you talked about in there, maybe you didn't say these words, but it's giving managers the tools.
Mm-hmm.
The tools. And I want to point people, we can put a link to this podcast in our show notes, John. It's Jason Lauritson's check-in process. If nothing else, creating an ongoing conversation that has continuity with an employee, a deepening understanding of their needs. So his check-in method is super simple. It's easy to deploy. You can practice it and get really efficient and good at it. Along with that, then, head, heart, and briefcase.
And we will be right back.
With employee disengagement at its highest level in 9 years, your company can't afford to miss the mark when it comes to optimizing your hiring, management, and team performance practices. At its lowest level, employee turnover costs you $11,000 per person. And those are dollars you can easily save with the right set of people analytics. Real Good Ventures is a talent optimization consultancy specializing in world-class analytics specific to your people and the critical role they play within your organization. Gain confidence in your hiring practices, keep the boss holes from driving your talent away, design your teams for flawless execution, and create a culture that offers meaning and fulfillment. Real Good Ventures has a family of validated diagnostic tools specific to the human aspect of business, because we know that all business issues are people issues. Visit us today at www.realgoodventures.com and bring meaning and fulfillment back into your workplace.
Okay, let's get back to the program.
When we're helping people determine how to grow and learn and evolve, we want to think about it in terms of head, heart, and briefcase. And that's a framework maybe we've unpacked. I know we've unpacked that in the past.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
In an episode. But the head is the behavioral drives and the cognitive function. So for a lot of our employees, they're going to be asked to do things they don't feel confident about doing, or they prefer not to have to do. But in what ways can we support them adjusting or adapting their natural drives to accomplish some of that work? They don't need to be twisted around like a pretzel to do their job, but all of us have to adapt in some ways. John, you and I were just talking about my adaptation right before we push record on this. The details, the overwhelming amount of details and how much energy it takes for me to address the details. Heart, values. How is this person being able to grow and develop kind of in communion with their values and the company values? So are we helping people stretch and grow and become better people? And then the briefcase, motivation and ability comes down to, do people have the tools and the skills and knowledge they need to do their job? So I think head, heart, and briefcase is a simple but really, easy framework to use, a good framework to use for helping to develop people.
Well, and I would go back to your original point, because the job market is so tight. We are managers are forced to put people in roles for which they may not be optimized.
That's right.
But if you have the data and you are transparent in working with your direct reports and saying, listen, I know that I'm asking you to do something that is, one, I absolutely know your skill, your briefcase, you have the capability of doing this, but this is going to push you into an area of adaptation. I'm going to work with you on that. We're going to work on this. I'm going to coach, mentor, and it may be just temporary. But at least you are having that conversation instead of, pissing somebody off and burning them out. And that's what happens, though. That's exactly what happens. But the manager needs to be aware of this. This is why it all hinges on that manager. So
it does.
So there are a couple of other ideas related to the managers. What about training them? How about that? How about equipping them to develop other people? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, indeed, an important notion here. And we have to recognize that training managers today in this climate and in this workforce, in this work world, is very different than it was 3 years, 5 years ago, 7 years ago. It's called hybrid work. Hybrid work has changed everything. So if we had any concern or worry about managers being able to read their employees and their level of engagement and to stay in contact with them and literally see or read the signs, now we have a screen that we have to look through and all kinds of weird things we have to figure out and interpret. It is so complex. And to be honest, I wouldn't want to be a manager in this day and age. I think that it makes their job tougher. So if the goal of training managers would be to help them spot and understand and see where disengagement may be happening, we're going to help them learn how to do that in a hybrid world.
Yep.
And that takes practice and prowess. I don't even know of any organization, John, that we work with that has, kind of mastered this area yet.
Well, and we're gonna have an episode on that about the RTO, the return to office movement, and what I think it's an article for Sherm talks about the Great Compromise, rather than mandating people coming back to work. And instead making them part of or enlisting them in solutions for how do we look at a hybrid work environment versus, there are some large organization CEOs that are expecting by 2025, we're going to be all back to the office. That's their ambition. Yeah. And the resistance is pretty significant. So that one's, sort of that command and control, which we have been railing against, that's the old model. It doesn't work. That trust and autonomy, it needs to give way to a more trust and autonomy framework, and that's very difficult for organizations to adopt. But we're going to be talking about that in another episode.
That's right. So manager training is huge. And John, I know you've mentioned this numbers of times in our previous episodes. And we've certainly highlighted the work of Gallup's book, It's the Manager. You've said this over and over again. Yeah. And yet we still encounter many organizations who tolerate a manager who isn't up to speed and doesn't know how to develop, or maybe doesn't have an interest in developing other people. And quite honestly, it's unfair and unkind. After a while, it becomes abusive to expect that person, to do that. Effectively, to develop other people, to get outside of themselves, to have more interest in the others, when in fact they're either not wired that way or they don't want to. Yeah. But we talk about it, it continues on for years at a time, and the cost is absolutely employees leaving the organization, or their body may stay, but their heart and mind have gone somewhere else. I loved the episode most recently dropped here with Jamie Whited, and her talking about her inability to see and be present to the needs of her direct reports until all of a sudden she was. And I think that's what we're talking about. So, if you even have a question mark in your mind about one of your managers and their capability, or even your own, chances are you have a deficit there and a problem, and it's cost you. It's costing you, and it has cost you dearly in the past.
For sure. And, people that don't care to manage and develop other people, there's a better term for them, and that is individual contributor. So give them a chance to go back into an individual contributor role with no dishonor or shame. That's the kind of work world we should develop. Anything else, Sarah, when it comes to engagement? Yeah, what else?
Yeah, one last idea, John. If the goal here ultimately is to slow that workforce velocity, the quiet quits, the people rotating, because even in the market that we're in, it's still the deal that people believe they can get a job somewhere else that would be better. And they're just, as you and I know, they're just not going to be as tolerant of unhappy circumstances and bad bosses as they have been maybe in the past. So one thing you can do right now today, which doesn't cost you any money, is to have a stay interview. Get out there, talk to your people. Ask them specific questions about what's working, what's not working, how they're feeling about, their commitment to the work, and what they need. Are they getting what they need, and what would they need to be more successful or to feel more fulfilled, more on target with purpose? What are your thoughts about stay interviews, John?
Well, I go back to what you had suggested, Sarah. Go listen to the Jason Lauritsen podcast or episode related to the check-in method. That is, if the stay interview would suggest that, okay, we are at risk of losing this person, or I want to be proactive rather than responsive. I want to be proactive and just make sure that I am having regular conversations with my folks that ultimately the result helps them find a reason to stay because there's a relationship with the manager and this manager is interested in my growth and development. But that's where the check-in method is so powerful. It doesn't have to be complicated, but this is what is required today. This is what the reinvented manager has to be doing. And if we are going to lift engagement within our teams, and it again, you said it rests on the shoulders of our managers. So, and by the way, we're going to have an episode in the future. We're going to have an episode with Bill Shaninger, who co-authored a book called Power to the Middle and talks about the necessity to help shore up our middle managers because they're the ones that are going to make or break our organizations. We've always known that, but make sure you tune in for that. It'll be coming up in the next month or two.
And John, you and I work with plenty of super busy, high profile CEOs. If you don't have the time to do this and you're a CEO, you make sure that your VPs and your team leads are doing this. You make sure that this data is coming back to you and the information is available. And hey, we'll throw a link to, there's a couple of articles associated with the content that we shared today. The story first showed up in Inc. magazine, and then Vistage kind of did a little spin on it, and we've kind of distilled that down for you today. But I'd say, John, in closing, even though hiring is difficult right now, there are things leaders can do. We've highlighted them to increase productivity, to deepen engagement, shore up retention, get ready for growth, slow that workforce velocity, and really prepare for the accomplishment of their goals. So whether the economic landscape is going to worsen or better, employee engagement is something we're always going to have. We're always going to have to keep our eye on that prize and be working. It's not a one and done. It's something we have to continuously invest in.
Yep. It's a marathon, not a sprint.
There you go.
Yeah. All right. Well, thanks, Sarah. This was great.
You bet, John. It was great. And we'll see you next time here on the Boss Hole Chronicles.
We'd like to thank our guest today on the Boss Hole Chronicles. And if you have a Boss Hole Chronicles story of your own, please email us at mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. Once again, mystory@thebossholechronicles.com. We'll see you again soon.